Okay. Maureen, do you want to start us off today?
Sure, I can. Absolutely. So thank you so much for everyone for coming to today's meeting. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. For those of you who saw the email that I sent out yesterday, just a quick reminder that in today's meeting, we really want to focus on trying to come up with some solutions and some concrete recommendations for the beginning movement between licensure levels. So we'd really be looking today to have some firm recommendations coming out of those small groups that we can then talk about and agree on when we come back into the larger group. We're moving from level 1 to level 2 and then level 2 to level 3. Kim, if you can go to the next slide, please. And so you did get the link from Kim to access the materials for today's meeting, which included the agenda. If I could please get a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved, Nancy Rupert.
Thank you, Nancy. And can I get a second, please?
Second.
Thank you so much. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Any nays? All right, the motion carries. Thank you. And then we also received the minutes from our June 18th meeting. So if you could please take a quick look at those. And then if I could please get someone to make a motion to approve the minutes from the June 18th meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. And if I could get a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. And the motion for the minutes to be approved from the June 18th meeting carries. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, Maureen. Who seconded for the agenda and for the minutes?
Keisha Clemens.
Clemens. Thank you.
Okay, so just a quick reminder of our norms. They are listed there. We go over these at the beginning of each meeting, but just a quick reminder that we want everyone's voice to be able to be heard, and we want to value the opinions and ideas of everyone in our group. Next slide, please. And then our guiding principles. And remember, our two main principles we're really looking at in this work is number one, does our idea impact students? And number two, is it measurable in an authentic setting, which means in the presence of students, would we be able to measure this and determine how it is affecting their learning in a positive way? All right, and so today we're really going to be looking at that second question on this list. What specific skills are necessary to advance to the next licensure level? And again, coming out of your small groups, we are really going to be asking you to come together in your small group to figure out what you really think are the most important skills to move between those early licensure levels, bring those back to the large group. So at the conclusion of today's meeting, we have some solid recommendations for the movement between those beginning licensure levels. Next slide, please. Okay, so Kim did send out the SharePoint link, which has the folder, which includes the minutes, and it has different materials, and it also has the materials we'll be using for today's breakout sessions. If for some reason you did not get that email, if you could just put something in the chat to Kim really quick to let her know that you did not receive it, or if you're having trouble accessing those materials, please let us know. And then there is also the public agenda, which is posted for each meeting by day and time. And you can get to that through that State Board meeting site, which the link is located on the slide. All right, so the subcommittee work process. So we have the completion of the Advancement and Development Subcommittee, and our job is going to be identifying those skills for licensure levels. We did the survey for that already. So we did that a couple of weeks ago. We asked you just kind of give us some ideas so we could get a starting ground base of the different skills we thought were necessary. We then synthesized those survey results to focus on the first two levels of licensure. In the last meetings, we've reviewed and revisited those survey results. So to move from the learning permit to the license 1 and from license 1 to license 2. We've been doing that through breakout sessions. And so the first session is going to be about 25 minutes today, where we're going to discuss moving from the learning permit to license 1. We'll then come back to whole group, have a little bit of discussion, and then break out again into the license 1 to license 2 small groups. And that will also be about 25 minutes. We will also be having whole group discussions where you'll be able to bring the information from your small groups back to the larger group, where we can all talk together in a larger group setting in order to make our final recommendations. And again, today's goal is going to be to provide those recommendations for the first 2 licensure levels. All right, so while you are in our breakout groups, each member of our subcommittee received an invitation to those documents in SharePoint. And again, if you did not get that, please just let Kim know. We will only have 2 breakout rooms today. Michael will be facilitating one breakout room and I will be facilitating the other. And it was just randomly selected grouping. So you're just going to be randomly placed into those groups. And once you get into your small group, we are going to ask your group to identify someone who will be your note taker to capture all of your ideas. The person who is the note taker is going to use the Word document in SharePoint and the survey results that we had from several months ago to determine what skills are really needed for those licensure levels. Again, our first breakout, we're only going to be focusing on moving from license 1 to license 2. And in our second breakout, we'll be focusing on moving from license 2 to license 3. Each of those breakout sessions will be 25 minutes. Then we will come back to the whole group for about 25 minutes, post breakout groups to just kind of have a chat and see where we all are. And then we're going to spend about 20 minutes as a whole group working on the confirmation of the recommendations as we close out the meeting today. All right, so we are going to be going into our first breakout session. And so if you're interested in being the note taker, if you want to go ahead and pull up that Word document from the SharePoint, that would be fantastic. And so you're just going to go into your breakout room and we're going to work on that first level of licensure, moving from level 1 to level 2.
Can I ask a question before we move to breakout sessions? This is Melissa Tooley. So at the last session, it's been a little while, so I don't fully remember, but I know we made some, I think, pretty big kinds of recommendations about shifts to what the different license levels would actually be that seem like they would be pertinent to this conversation that we're about to have in terms of what we think would make sense to include in moving from one license level to another. And so I noticed that there was a document that looked sort of like a revised version of the pathways in the folder that included some of those things. I wasn't sure if we're working off of that version now. Like, has this sort of been vetted with other subcommittees? I'm just sort of not sure, I guess, like where we are in that part of the conversation, because whether what we're talking about in terms of being a license, a level license 1, moving to a license 2, what we think should constitute being able to demonstrate competency will matter based on sort of what it is we're saying that person is in charge of or responsible for, I guess, whether they're leading their own classroom, for example, or working alongside a mentor teacher, full time.
Yeah, and thanks so much for asking that, Melissa. That's a really great question. So Michael, if you want to help me out on this one. So our job is really just to determine what those skills will be to move from one licensure level to the next, right? There's going to be another subcommittee that's I think it's licensure. Is it licensure, Michael? That's actually going to say the specific skill, like not the skills, but the different things that you will need to be able to do at each level of licensure. And so I think that some of what you're seeing on this might be coming out of licensure, but I don't know that they have any specific recommendations that they have made yet either. And their meeting, I think, is going to be later this month.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We're looking to capture as much of a kind of our perspective and what we want to see result. And so that's why this was made editable, so that we could go in and add these kinds of things. So then later the subcommittee co-chairs can meet all together and kind of talk through these pieces. And then PEPSC as a whole can talk, and but it at least gives us things to work off of, kind of a frame, I guess, a framework. But yeah, I think at this point there's plenty on the table in terms of the kinds of things that can be added into this kind of pathways to help kind of delineate the different pieces. But ultimately, we do want to get to, what are those specific standards that we want to include from 1 to 2, 2 to 3.
That's
Yeah, and
helpful.
I think everyone is kind of in the same boat we are, where no one has made any solid recommendations. And I think licensure is kind of waiting to see what skills we say you would need to have to go from learning permit to license 1, or license 1 to license 2, to kind of inform some of their work as well. That's not to say that at the end of today, when we make these recommendations, that if licensure comes back and says, wait, well, we've decided that really at license 1 and license 2, you're going to be with a mentor teacher the entire day, that doesn't mean that we can't go back and rework some of our initial recommendations. We just really want to make sure that coming out of today's meeting, we are kind of on a solid footing of what we think our recommendations are going to be. We've had a lot of really, really great discussion, but we haven't actually like nailed down what we really think those skills should be. And that's what we're looking to try to do today. That does not mean that, as we move forward in this process, that if the different licensure levels change, or if we find out that there's going to be additional support for those beginning teachers in those early levels of licensure that we weren't anticipating, that we wouldn't have an opportunity to go back and kind of reconfigure what we said for our initial skills to match what the actual licensure levels are going to look like.
Totally understood that all of these things are somewhat moving targets, but just to clarify then, is the set of pathways that is mapped out currently on our screens the one that we are using in our conversations in our breakout groups for determining what competencies would help move someone from license 1 to license 2?
Yeah. So Melissa, is the question, are we going to change the titles of each, right? Learning permit, license 1. Is that what you're asking, or are you asking something different?
Well, this particular version of the pathways is different than what we have seen in the past, where here license 1 is not the teacher of record. Like, as far as I can tell, the things that are highlighted in yellow are actually new to
Yes.
what we've seen relative to last time, and I think are based on the conversation that we have last time. So I just want to make sure that as we are moving forward with these conversations, this is the version that we should be basing our recommendations upon, not the prior version.
Yes, that would be correct, right? So I think, in all honesty, one of the challenges has been that no group at this point has been willing to lay down any specific recommendations, which slows the work of every group, right? And so I think in our last co-chairs meeting, I even mentioned this kind of stagnation that we can sit here and talk for months about this stuff and never get anywhere. And so I feel like it's time for us to start making some recommendations, understanding that just because we put these recommendations in and push them forward, that doesn't mean that that's ultimately what this is going to be. But I think we have to get something out there, and then it gets refined over time, over the next couple of months. But I do think that this is what you see here is what we are working on right now. And certainly we can add more to it. We can question whether or not something in here should remain, but we have to start somewhere.
Michael, this is Jeff Coltrane. Can I chime in? And I've raised this concern in one of the other groups. I was on the group that helped develop this framework and vision. And I know one of the other subcommittees has been talking about how license 1 should not be a teacher of record. And I think one concern is that would actually make this new framework more restrictive than where we are currently, because currently teachers are able to enter the classroom either under an emergency certification or under the new residency license with only a bachelor's degree, and without any training or experience with pedagogy. And so this making license one not to be a teacher of record would actually be more restrictive than we are. I think we all probably agree that it is less than ideal to have someone without any pedagogical or content training being in a classroom, but that's the reality, unfortunately, in some schools and districts. So, one thought that maybe this group could do is, if that's going to remain a recommendation, then what basic skills are we expecting someone in license one to be able to have to be a teacher of record? So if it's something beyond a bachelor's degree, then what would we expect that to be? I think the other thing that's highlighted here is the industry certification and experience. And that is actually something that CTE teachers currently can have. They can have that industry certification and experience and then enter the profession without a full license. And so that's something that, might not apply to an elementary school teacher, but would apply to, I don't know, an auto mechanic teacher or something like that. So just something to keep in mind. I see it's highlighted on here, but that is, again, a requirement that's allowed currently in our licensure system.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I wonder, Jeff, if really what we're trying to do, what we need to do is distinguish between who a license one and a license two are if they both hold bachelor's degrees.
I would agree with that. Like, what is it that, again, the skills, the competencies that a teacher needs to be classified as a license two or a license three? And then obviously that teacher of record conversation is for a different subcommittee or for a different determination.
Sure. And I'm one of the things I'm sitting here thinking through is how do these two groups look? What's the difference really, right? So is the license one teacher in residency somebody who is hired, has a bachelor's degree, is hired in as a resident on a residency license, but they've not done any work towards their license, whereas the license two person has something, they've done some work on their license. You see what I'm saying, right? So they've spent some time in a prep program, or they spent some time in some alternative licensure program, and they've met some benchmarks.
I think that was the vision of the group that developed this, is that currently if someone comes in as, an alternatively certified residency teacher, or even, a Teach for America teacher, that they're coming in likely at something that would look like a license one on this with just a bachelor's degree. And then they're enrolling in a preparation program or a series of preparation programs to meet the requirements, but they stay at that residency license until they've fully met the requirements to become, I don't know if it's an IPL or a fully professional licensed. And so instead of sort of holding that teacher at a bare minimum license, if you will, the idea was to incentivize and reward them for moving along that pathway to getting fully licensed. So if the teacher can demonstrate competencies in either their content area or a set of predefined pedagogical skills, then they can move to that license two, which would both move them up on the licensure scale, but also, as was envisioned here, result in higher pay. So they've got that incentive to do it. If they can demonstrate both the content and the pedagogical skills necessary for their license, then they would move to license three, which also is a higher increase in pay. So the idea was to reward and incentivize teachers along that pathway to getting fully licensed, which we currently don't do. Once you enter the profession as a residency teacher, you're at that license level no matter how many courses or tests or whatever you pass along the way, even though you might have the competencies to show, hey, I can do these things and I should be considered for full licensure.
Sure.
So
Okay.
in my mind, the real differentiation here is what do we mean by content skills and how are we going to measure that? And then what do we mean by pedagogical skills and how are we going to measure that?
Yep. So if our goal for today is to lay down some concrete requirements, right, for 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, that should help us get at this distinction between 1 and 2, right?
I would think so. And maybe between 2 and 3.
And 2 and 3 as well. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Kim, are you going to break us out?
I am. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Hi there. This is Kim. Sorry, I can't hear you. I think you're muted. I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I was logging on to make sure that I had this software in my computer for Monday's meeting. I apologize.
That's okay.
I feel very foolish now, but it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, well, thank you very much and have a fabulous
Sure.
weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
All right, looks like we're all back. Is everybody back?
Yep, our room is back as well, Michael. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I want to start just by saying like this is really hard work. Acknowledge that it's hard work. So rather than me talk through this as group one, does somebody from our group want to kind of get us started, give summary, maybe talk about where we're at? And we've got some more notes being dropped into ours.
I can attempt it as long as my group agrees to chime in. We had a lot of discussion that we didn't really quite get to the brass tacks of our task, other than to say that if we're looking at content, at pedagogy and professionalism, going from a licensure 1 to a licensure 2, that these things are possible. But I think we got caught into this idea of mentors and mentoring and what's needed there. There's my contribution, or the lack thereof. Someone can help.
Nancy, this is Jeff. I think the only other thing I would add, and someone's putting this in the notes, is that we also discussed the different standards that are used for assessing for the schools of ed or the pathways to practice work. Use the in-task standards, the professional learning standards, and then the EdTPA as an assessment of those students' pedagogical skills at our EPPs. I'm not sure who LH is in our group, but if
Laura.
they would like to, Laura, if you'd like to share what you typed into the thing, I think that's very helpful. So.
Sure. We were just trying to figure out a way to frame all this. And one of the things we talked about is there's a lot of standard sets already out there, a lot of things that, while we could certainly develop something brand new, but there are some things that we might want to think about to start. And one of the national standard sets for beginning teachers is in task. And that's what a lot of our preparation programs are grounded in. There is already alignment that exists that shows how in-task relates to the North Carolina professional teaching standards, and EdTPA and PPAT are two of the assessments that in North Carolina are already mandated. And so we were just sort of seeing where we could not duplicate, but are there ways that we can pull those pieces in? I know that our current licensure process can be rather unwieldy, but that might not necessarily mean that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that there are some pieces that might give us a defined set of skills to start with, especially if we start at level 3 and work backwards. And so we were talking about, considering some of those pieces that are already in place as a framework.
Yeah. And so if you've not seen CCSSOs in task, so there's the link if you want to look at it. And you could look at, for example, this page 16 is where it starts with learner development. And so they list out 3 performances. So teachers assessing individual and group performance, creating developmentally appropriate instruction, collaborating with families, communities, colleagues. And then they've got 4 pieces of essential knowledge and 4 critical dispositions. But certainly I agree with Laura. If a lot of this work has been done, why would we recreate a lot of it?
a quick question on the Ed TPA and PPAT. Is that assessment divided into those same sort of categories as the INTEST standards? Because maybe instead of thinking about, like, if our schools of ed are using the Ed TPA, PPAT, it's a required assessment already, and we know that it's a good measure of pedagogical skills. Why not just make that the assessment, or the INTEST standards, and that be the assessment for what we'd expect to see across these 3 early licenses? But are you able to split the Ed TPA into smaller parts? Like, could somebody pass
No,
part of it and not another part of it?
no. I mean, you have to. It's more integrated than that. I mean, I think that for me at least, the Ed TPA piece fits nicely with License 3, right? So I pass the Ed TPA, I complete my program, and I pass the Ed TPA, and I'm a License 3 teacher.
And that just to chime in, that Ed TPA is designed to measure, are you ready to teach? Like it's a
Right.
assessment. It is designed for candidate readiness, and it was also designed to be something of a capstone project to assess, establish, yes, this person should be ready to go forth. It makes, to Michael's point, it makes a lot of sense that it would be a capstone or a gateway on a level 3, 100%.
But it wouldn't necessarily, Jeff, cover things like
it's not going to cover professionalism or disposition,
right.
It's like that.
Yeah. It's just not as comprehensive as
Right.
what we would expect of teachers, right? It really is, as Laura said, it's, can you do the work of a teacher? It's a pretty good measure of that, of whether or not you are prepared to be a teacher.
But it doesn't cover everything that's an in-task. So there might be, if we look at it from the lens of the standards, and again, I am not advocating that this is the path we take. This is just a way to potentially frame this work. If you look at the standards as a whole, and we back up from, this standards 1 through 10 on in-task, meeting all those capabilities are where we would want a teacher to, be at the beginning of their journey, right? That they're able to do all of these things. Then pulling back from that, what does that look like as they progress? Even looking to Michael's point on page 18 on the document he just posted around standard 1 on learner development and whatnot, understanding, how kids develop just at a basic, child psych 101 sort of a level. Where does that fit in the grand scheme? Because you certainly have to understand the kids before you can go design the instruction. So maybe that's, level 1 or level 2 versus, something we would not wait and want to see at level 3. We'd want to see it before that. So I think there might be some discussion around a progression here. But again, this is one option.
One cautionary note that I feel compelled to throw out here is I think that the original, while people can progress by passing, say, Ed TPA, that could be a step. We also want to try and find other ways for that effectiveness to be shown, because we do have multiple examples of people who are very talented in the classroom who are having a positive effect on students, but yet are stymied by the standardized tests that are now required. So I think it's important to not have that be the only measure of how you move from license 1 to license 2 or whatever.
And Jeff, you could essentially be a License 3 teacher forever.
So that was not the vision of the group that developed this, is that you're in those first 3 licenses for 5 years, and you have those 5 years to demonstrate effectiveness for 3 of those 5 years, and that would move you to license 4, which, in our current framework would be is it a professional license? I forget the phrase, but anyway, the fully
Continuing,
professional continuing license. Thank you.
yeah,
So that continuing license is based on effectiveness. And I think that's part of where, to Jill's point, the vision for this removes that potential barrier of a test, is that if you're demonstrating effectiveness, you can move into a full license, potentially without having to pass a test or demonstrate on the EdTPA. But the test in the EdTPA could help you to move between those license 1, 2, and 3. I don't think the group came up with any type of definitive answer to what if a teacher can't meet the 3 out of 5 years in those first 5 years, what happens next? I think that's another question that the PEPSC subcommittees have to wrestle with. There was discussion about, could you have a probationary period that could allow a teacher additional time to try and get there, which I think is worth consideration. I think we talked about maybe a 6th year if need be, but you could not stay at a license 3 forever. If you can't demonstrate that effectiveness to move to license 4, then the idea is that would be a pathway out of the profession.
okay.
Michael, there was a really good question that came up in the chat too, that I think this might be a good time to bring it up, but it asked if we have a definition of what effectiveness means. Like, how are we actually defining that you are an effective teacher?
Yeah, I think that's to be determined, right?
That's right. That's one of the other big questions that these subcommittees have to wrestle with, in the same way of figuring out how do you advance from one license to the next. I think, we currently have a definition of effectiveness as based on EVOS and standardized test scores. But I think the question about how are we going to measure effectiveness for the 60% of teachers that don't have EOGs or EOCs? And then is that the only measure, like, for those teachers that we're going to look at? So I forget which subcommittee is looking at that, but that is one of those. That's a critical question in all of this. So,
yep. So Melissa brought up a good point about standards and why not just use professional teaching standards. And so I think that's a good, why not? Why would we not pull the professional teaching standards?
I can add to that in just saying that in our breakout group, which was group 2, we talked to that similar point about, not wanting to recreate the wheel and using what's already in place as much as possible. And both because that sort of gives us something to start with when it is sort of difficult to do this, and lots of smart folks have already done this work, and also that it helps novice teachers better align with the ongoing expectations of teaching moving forward, right? We don't have like a different set of expectations here and then another set there. And I think it was Andy who said, it might be helpful to start with the NCES and the different levels of proficiency of those standards, and sort of at least having an initial framework to think about what are the types and proficiencies of competencies at these different various licensure levels, and like, do we want to use that as some sort of starting place at least? It might not be exact, but to sort of see which ones of those we think we would want to incorporate at different licensure levels. So that was one piece we talked about.
So I totally agree with that. So one of the things that I struggle with is, and this came up in our group, about teacher evaluation. And the challenge is, I think, I would love for us to be able to use teacher evaluation as the measure to advance from one category to the next, right? And in that, if I'm a teacher in residency and I get evaluated and I'm evaluated at the proficient level to be able to move from 1 to 2 because I'm proficient on the NESA standards would be great. The reality is there is very little distinction between teachers in our state. And that's unfair, I think, to a lot of folks. And I don't know how to get around that other than having a stronger validation process for supervisors.
Michael, this is not, I mean, yes, I'm not trying to add to your point. I just wanted to mention to this group, in addition to the official North Carolina teacher standards in 2008, okay, so that's been a while, the state board did approve a teacher candidate version of the North Carolina standards. And I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. I Googled it and it looks like Elon has it posted. So I'm going to share that with you. DPI doesn't have these on their website, but I know this is what a lot of our EPPs are familiar with, that we have to, because we have to align all our programs to this or the North Carolina teacher standards. And so this, I guess all I'm trying to say is the candidate version of the North Carolina evaluation rubric is also something that's out there that has done, some of this work has been done. Again, it's not been revised or looked at or aligned or whatever since 2008. So it's been a while. It does exist.
Are the professional teaching standards or the NESA standards based on InTask as well? Is there sort of alignment across all of those?
Yeah, you can crosswalk them because we do it for accreditation.
Okay.
We crosswalk them. InTask updated their stuff a few years back. It's much more, I think it's a little more updated than the North Carolina ones, but Michael's right. We crosswalk them. But it does raise the question of, if the students are ultimately candidates are going to be evaluated by their principal on this set, if this is what's going to happen when you're a residency candidate, if this is what's going to happen when you're in the field, maybe that's the set we should be using. InTask does give us a nice framework and some language around that. But that's, again, which framework we opt to use is conversation.
Yep. And honestly, if you're looking at this this rubric, so certainly it covers the professional teaching standards, what you expect, and then it has the option of an observation or an artifact, right? And so then it's incumbent upon the mentor or the supervisor to work with this beginning teacher on demonstrating each of these things. I mean, I feel like you could almost make the case that I think working backwards, I become a licensed 3 teacher when I complete an approved program and I pass whatever the required licensing exams are. So whether we stay with EdTPA and PPAT and the foundations of reading, whatever that is, right? So I don't think we have to say what that is. We could say it is license 3 is completion of an approved program and passing the required assessments, just like it says on here. And now we're making a distinction between 1 and 2 and 2 to 3, but we know what 3 is. It's right there written below, right? So it's really, how do we go from level 1, license 1 to license 2? And if we go back to this rubric here, let's see, I can pull it up if you're not looking at it. Right, so if I go to this rubric, then what we would have to decide is how do I get from 1 to 2? Do I have to be proficient in everything? And that makes me a level 2? Can I be developing in some? I think if I'm an emerging, then I'm clearly not a level 2, right? So is this something that we would consider. Yeah, I have 58 million tabs open.
I would like to shift back to your, let me get my paper in front of me. Your license 3, that the only way you can be license 3 is if you finish an approved program. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Because I thought we were looking for alternatives
To an approved program?
to a license 3.
What do you mean by that?
Or can you go from a license 2 to a license 4 without being at license 3? Yes. It looks like there's little hops.
So to go from a 2 to a 4,
You'd have to complete all the things that got all the metrics that were aligned for a license 3 or alternatives to those metrics.
so right in the
Michael, I think maybe Jeff or Jill from the roundtable could help clarify this, but that was not the vision for license 3 to be completing an EPP program. It's demonstrating the competencies equal to completing an EPP program and passing those tests. So Jill or Jeff probably could help out here.
That's correct, because we were always we are mindful that most of our candidates are still going to come through an EPP program, but there are still but we want it to be available to people who don't use that traditional pathway, just like the residency license right now. So people that have industry certifications, I mean, we want to find another way besides coming through an EPP that gets to teacher effectiveness.
So can I
without locking in that one, that's not the only way you can become an effective teacher.
We know from research that it is the best way,
yes,
but it's not the only way.
Yeah.
Point. Yeah.
So can I throw out something that gives me a lot of pause? So I think for and people who've known me for a long time have known that I was a vocal opponent of RALCs. I thought RALCs were bad for children in North Carolina. I thought RALCs essentially lowered the bar to the profession in a way that wasn't good. And I think the data would bear out when we looked at lateral entry teachers who did not go through a program, a comprehensive program. They weren't as effective, right? They didn't stay as long. And the problem was we allowed people to cobble together programs that didn't create a program. It created a disparate set of skills. And so I could have come into the profession, taken a course at UNC Charlotte, and then a course at University of Phoenix online. And this whole course-based approach led to, I think, huge problems in the field. And so by having folks actually, so part of the residency license was you affiliated with a program. It could be a traditional EPP, but it could be it doesn't have to be a traditional EPP. So I worry a little bit if we say, well, there's just this set of skills you got to show. I worry a lot about that.
I think somebody put in there at the very beginning that time was a factor and mentoring is critical. And the research also states that after 3 years, there's not that big of a difference between any of the ways people get licensed. So it really is in what happens in those first 3 years for people who are but also are not part of an EPP program. Will the state sponsor that?
Yeah, and that was my sort of understanding is the reason to move towards something where the first license was getting really intensive on the job training and mentorship is so that you were able to, like, it's not just sort of scattershot, right? It's like a really intensive, you know, from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year, you see the whole system and all the pieces that make it work, right? Which is very different than, I think, participating in a lot of different courses in different places. Like, it's just a very, I guess I'm just not sure if it's comparable in terms of trying to sort of understand if somebody was coming through this type of like license one that's a residency versus some other pathway that is the sort of like scattershot approach.
Yeah, and we've created pathways inside of the state, right? So for example, Guilford County Schools has a program to license teachers. Wake County through their RESA, that RESA has a way to license teachers. I believe Charlotte or Central Piedmont or something like that might have one as well. Like, and the part of the issue that I think you run into is we could end up with a cohort of teachers for whom no one is really accountable for those teachers, right? But yet we have a full system of accountability for EPPs. That seems extremely not only unfair, but perhaps unwise. And I'm all for, right? So, but I just feel like, I mean, you have to exist inside of some kind of a structure. So if I'm a teacher in an LEA, the LEA could certainly be monitoring this person's progress. That person could be doing a series of workshops, courses, micro-credentials, all different kinds of things in order to demonstrate the skills and perhaps the effectiveness, but they're owned by that district. And so that we then as a state could say, teachers in X district perform this, like, because what happens is, and we see this now, people are getting to the end of a program and they can't pass required exams. And who's that on? Well, it's on the prep program, right? I mean, if you can't pass the exam, then someone perhaps didn't prepare you very, or if a large proportion of people don't pass an exam, then that's on a program. If it's an individual, then perhaps it's an individual. But yeah, I just
Can I say something in here too, Michael? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do feel compelled to point this out. That the issue, as far as it seems like from us, we have a lot of, as Jeff, I think, pointed out, that folks who finish EPP programs, okay, not testing, but folks who finish EPP programs are better teachers in our state. They do stay longer. We do get a better outcome with folks who go through an EPP program, whether that's a traditional one or, you know, some whatever. They have that sustained focus, okay? But just like with schools, you know, there's some kids who, no matter what a teacher does, they struggle with testing. We have the same dynamic with adults, right? There are some people who struggle with testing, and the traditional historical response over the last 5 years has been to push back these tests. It doesn't seem to me that the issue is with EPP preparation. It seems to me that the issue is there are some folks that struggle with testing or don't want to do testing or whatever. And so there is a fundamental issue of if the test matters, then we have to hold folks accountable for it. And if it doesn't, and that's okay, if it doesn't, then why are we including it as part of these steps? If we think testing makes you a better teacher, then maybe it needs to be a level 4 requirement. And I don't conceptually agree with that, but the current model we've got of saying that you can do this or take a test or do whatever, you know, if we're hearing that there are people who are great teachers and they don't pass the test, then why do we have the test? And I don't fundamentally agree with that. I struggle. I got to be, my bias is 100% out on the table. I struggle with the idea of somebody who can't pass a test after 10 or 15 times of taking it. You know, what is, you know, I struggle with that. And I admit that I'm 100% with that. But if we say, you know, we have policymakers who are saying this test is a barrier, this test is a problem, this test doesn't do anything for us, then why do we continue to include it? You know, If we are going to instead say EPP program preparation is the better metric, then I don't understand why we don't put our eggs into those baskets and say EPP program preparation, turn you loose with completion from an EPP program and then hold you accountable. So I'm just going to throw that out there. It seems like there's a lot of issues and concerns with, we want you to, some people can do the test, some people can do this, some people can do this, some people can pass an EPP. The one thing that we have consistently seen that gives us a good outcome is EPP preparation. And, maybe that becomes that we've got a lot of folks who can pass, who go through an EPP program. So anyway, I will stop, but I just wanted to kind of piggyback on, Michael's point.
So Laura, you hit the nail on the head of what was, I think, probably the driving issue that the group that developed this framework was wrestling with. Was, we've pushed back the test. We've got people who say they can't pass the test, but then we hear that they're great teachers. And so our licensure model right now is all based on inputs. You take these classes, you pass these tests, you get this license, and then you become a teacher. Whether you're a good teacher or not, if you can pass the test and take the classes, then you become a teacher. And so the idea here is let's get rid of all those things and let's make it all based on outcomes. If you're effective as a teacher, then you deserve to be licensed. So, you could have an individual come in at license 1 and decide, I'm not going to take a single class, I'm not going to take a single test. And in 3 years, their first 3 years, they're showing effectiveness, they can become a license 4 teacher because they demonstrated I'm a damn good teacher because I'm effective. And so they can move straight to license 4. You could also have teachers who come through the EPPs, which we're right, that is our strongest pathway into the profession, or our state EPPs, who take all those classes and are highly effective when they come out. They meet the requirements under license 3. So then they come in at license 3 making $5,000-$10,000 more than that teacher who came in with just a bachelor's. And in 3 years, they've demonstrated their effectiveness and they go to license 4 too. So it's all about that. License 4 is all about your outcomes as an educator. I think what we're trying to figure out is how do you differentiate in the first 5 years among those 3 beginning licenses to help incentivize and reward teachers to get the knowledge, skills, and abilities they need to get to license 4. You're going to have I don't know, who knows how many, 1 in a million that are going to come in and be a great teacher without any training. And then you're going to have teachers that come out of your EPPs that are going to be great teachers because they came through your EPPs. And those aren't the ones we're really worried about. We're worried about the ones that are going to need that support along the way. And how do we incentivize them to get it, provide the rewards for them to get it, so that then they become a fully licensed 4 teacher. Again, all based on their outcomes. I think the key thing you'll notice in that framework is that to become licensed 4, you don't have to pass a single test. You don't have to take a single class. If you can demonstrate you're effective, that's what matters. It's really about those supports in those first 5 years that we're trying to figure out here in terms of advancing across those. It's all based on outcomes instead of inputs. And so I think, teachers that would come through a traditional EPP, and they've met the requirements for license 3 would start off at a much higher place than they do currently because they came through that route. It's incentivizing people to go through that pathway because we know that it is a pathway that prepares highly effective teachers.
I do want to. So I've been monitoring the chat too, and I think it's also important to note that I sometimes I feel like there's a perception that we have very limited options for people in the state in order to become a teacher, and I don't find that to be the case. So one, you could go to a community college, do 2 years, transfer to UNC Charlotte, and 2 years later, you're a teacher, right? You could come in as an undergraduate at NC State, do 4 years, you're a teacher. You could be a second career professional who goes and does a full-time program, that would be probably the most restrictive because it forces people to take time off of work and all that. However, we also have a number of other options that are approved for people. Like I said earlier, you could go through Wake County or you could go through Guilford County. You could be a teacher of record doing your program part-time and earn your license. You could go through Pathway to Practice. You're a full-time teacher. You're doing a competency-based program, right? You're using your artifacts from your classroom. So it's not like there's only one way and it's really hard. I always get a little frustrated when it sounds like we're going down this model of it's so hard to get into the profession. It's not. If you have a bachelor's degree, it is not. And you just have to know, or somebody's got to help you figure out which pathway is best for you.
And Michael, I agree with you. And I think what this model was trying to do is currently there are 5 different licenses that someone who comes in with a bachelor's degree could hold. They can have a permit to teach, an emergency license, a provisional license, a residency license, or a limited license. And then you've got one license that most people who come to an EPP who meet those requirements can hold, which is an IPL, and then you've got a CPL. Yeah. So the idea here is to streamline that process. We might still have 100 different ways to enter the profession or programs in the profession, but everybody that comes in this way is going to be in this license, everybody in this way in this license, everybody in this way in this license. So it's trying to streamline that process and make it much simpler for people to move from license to license and make it clearer how you move from license to license versus having this myriad of issues. I don't disagree with you. I think we've got lots of very strong pathways into the profession, but the licenses are a train wreck.
So 100% agree. I think the biggest barrier to entry in our state is Praxis 1. And I talk about this way too much now, but we need to eliminate Praxis 1 in this state. It's not a valid measure when it comes to teaching performance. All it does is keep people out of the classroom. So I think that's if we want to talk about barriers, that's the barrier. Get rid of Praxis 1. But with that said, I agree with you, Jeff, that there are way too many licenses. I like that there are fewer licenses here. I'm wondering if we are settling on, so license 3 is essentially what? Meeting the standards, whether or not it's through a program. So what do folks think about proposing the teacher candidate rubric that Laura brought up earlier? That's in the chat, and I could drop it back in the chat if you need to look at it again. So one of the ways we could think about this is a teacher who is, let me go back to my other editable thing. A teacher who has a bachelor's degree. So I walk into the building as a license 1 because I haven't been able to demonstrate anything yet. My supervisor or my prep program or whoever it might be evaluates me against this rubric. And when I hit that proficient category, that's essentially the way I get to a level 2. Because having to meet those proficient pieces would, for example, mean, am I doing any kind of coursework or micro-credentialing or anything? Well, if I want to meet standard 1B, yeah, I would have to do some professional learning. And 1C. And this would get it, I think, what we're trying to do, because I could meet each of these individual elements in a different way. I might do it through a course or a micro-credential, or I might do it through an observation, or I might do it through an artifact, but somebody's got to evaluate me.
Michael, I'm like Maureen. I kind of like this idea. What would be helpful to me and someone else from the group, I feel like I've done a lot of talking today. So someone else from the group besides me and Jeff and Michael should talk. But I would love some time to let this sit. Does that make sense? Or to let,
Yep.
or other options that other folks want to hit? Because I like this idea. I am not 100% convinced that these standards are the most updated version, but that is something that certainly could be, addressed in a future group down the road. But it would at least give us a starting point in thinking about, how this might look. I think that I would like to have, I like this idea, but I think it has to let it marinate a little bit for
Sure.
and think through some processes between now and our next meeting. But I think this has promise.
And Michael, just to be clear, you're talking about the NESA standards or the NTEST standards or both?
I'm talking about the NESAs,
Okay,
since they are North Carolina
right.
based standards.
The candidate version, right?
The candidate version.
Okay, got it. And those are aligned with the NTEST standards and the EdTPA and all that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they would be, and honestly, I think if we said, hey, let's go down this path, then I would recommend we get a working group, perhaps a smaller subset of our larger group, to go through and perhaps do some recommended updates to these.
Got it.
So that they would be in line with whatever the most recent revisions to InTask or so on.
That might, isn't there a group that's looking at this, Michael, for the North Carolina teacher standards? I could be wrong.
I don't know.
Groups mixed up, but I think there's been some conversation about the North Carolina educator teacher standards, the ones that teachers are evaluated by their principals on, those being updated. I could be completely wrong about that, but we would certainly, actually, I think these are the North Carolina educator standards. It's just one level back, right? It's not a different set of standards. It's more like what's developing for a teacher is proficient for the candidate. I would have to look at that.
Yeah, that's how these were aligned, right? They're not
I think
up and
so.
down. They're on
I
an
think so.
angle. That the
I think so.
right, so the proficient here is actually the developing in the teacher, and the
I think so.
accomplished on these are the proficient on the teacher.
We would need to check that, but I think it's accurate, but don't hold me to that.
And the other piece of this is these were written because teacher candidates were not teachers of record.
I would agree with Laura. I think it's a good place to start. And since they're North Carolina standards and they're aligned with what our EPPs currently focus on, it seems like a good starting place.
Okay, and does everyone, so let me summarize, because I think a lot of this is what I've said and I don't know that everybody agrees. But essentially to go from, so learning permit is someone with an associate's degree. They're in a classroom, they're doing their thing. To go from learning permit to license 1, I obtain a bachelor's degree or I have industry certification or experience. To go from the license 1 to a license 2, the recommendation is that you have made some advancement on the rubric, not necessarily in its current form, but in some revised form. And you're evaluated either by your preparation program or your supervisor if you're just a teacher of record inside of it, or you're a teacher inside of a district in a district-run program. Are we recommending like that we eliminate the requirement that in order to obtain a residency license, you have to be affiliated with a program?
So, and sorry to talk again, but I know that was not a question I think that the people who developed the framework discussed. So I think it's worthy of discussion and from this group and the rest of the subcommittees.
Yeah.
And I know we're trying to reduce barriers, but I think that there needs to be some program that you're enrolled in order to gain the skills that you need to be an effective teacher. Like, I just don't see any way around the education piece to ensure that teachers are getting the skills that they need and that they're learning that in some type of validated program. So I don't think there's any way that we could remove the education piece and have them working through some type of education program with an affiliated university and still be able to say that we're developing the best teachers for our kids.
And I think we've established that there are lots of different types of programs in which you could enroll. And certainly the door is open to other potential programs, provided they're approved.
So I guess I just have a question about that, and sort of what, sorry, my world is often thinking about like perverse incentives. So I'm sort of in that mindset a lot of the time, but I guess I'm just curious, like, is the goal to proliferate like lots of different programs, or is it to try to push teachers toward programs that we think are most likely to serve them well? Because just hearing that last statement made me a little bit worried that if we're just like, as long as you're enrolled in some program, what will happen is we'll just have like a lot of programs pop up that are not necessarily quality. I mean, like if you're talking about like, we have a lot of programs now, like we have a lot of like fast track programs that we know don't particularly serve teachers really well. And so I think we would just have to be really clear what we're talking about when we say like a program, like a teacher prep program that like wasn't an EPP and what that would have to entail. I just I think I just got a little bit nervous when we were talking about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did not mean to make it seem like it was just going to be willy-nilly. You can enroll in any program. They would still need to be programs. And Dr. Hart just put in the chat box there that they do have to be approved by the State Board of Education. And it wouldn't just be like, a random, like, you're saying somebody's coming over to my kitchen and that's going to count as their program or something, right? I mean, it would still need to be something that was a validated program. My point was, I don't think there's a way for us to just say somebody just knows how to be a teacher and therefore there's no requirement for them to be enrolled in any type of program because they're just a good teacher because they can naturally teach well. That was all that I was trying to get there. So sorry if I caused any confusion about that.
Yeah, and Melissa, there are currently 55 approved educator preparation pathways in North Carolina. And there's a program called Teach, then there's ASU, then there's a group called Aspire. There are all of the universities, the Central Carolina Teaching Initiative, that's a consortium of school districts that run that. CMS Teaching Residency, that's Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools program. So you can see there are traditional EPPs, as you would think, like university-based. There are also LEA-based preparation programs. There are online programs. So there are a wealth of programs. And I think the point that I was at least making, and I think others were making it, and Maureen perhaps as well, is that we just think that tying the residency license to an affiliated program makes sense, right? It holds someone other than just the candidate accountable for their outcomes. Because the way we've set up, the way PEPSC has set up accountability, over the course of a certain set of years, if your program is not preparing graduates, you are going to lose your ability to prepare graduates or to prepare teachers. I think that's important.
This is Jeff again. I think the key distinction, I don't disagree with the idea of needing to be affiliated, but I think the key difference between at least this vision and then where we are currently is that there is not a requirement that you complete that program. I think if you can demonstrate your competencies and you can demonstrate effectiveness and move to license 4 without having fully completed the program, then there's not a requirement for you to complete. So I think that would just have to be an understanding. I think in my mind, being affiliated makes perfect sense. If I need help on these things, or some PD or training in this area, then I know who I can go to and who I can call on for help. But if I'm able to meet licensure requirements without fully completing the program, then I should be able to move on to the next phase of my career, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yes.
If I'm effective.
Correct. If I'm effective.
And then we would just have to be sure that in the case of these preparation programs, we're not holding them accountable for people who don't finish their program.
I would agree.
I think part of this sort of idea of this was when we were talking about it, each of these licensed 1 through 3 folks are going to have some professional development funds available to them that would let them take courses, micro-credentials, that would give them an ability to access those resources without necessarily being enrolled in a program that led them to a graduation or whatever. I mean, that money would be available, and EPPs would be able to provide those courses and those micro credentials to move them towards effectiveness in the classroom. And I probably didn't say that very well, Jeff. You might do better than me, but I mean, that's part of the concept of having that money available to them as they move through those steps.
That's right. They could use that to pay for courses through an EPP or some other type of supports if they needed. But I think the idea is that, again, knowing that our EPPs are the best preparers of teachers in our state, is that they would likely use those for supports being provided by an EPP.
Well, sure. And EPPs could create alternative pathways where they take all these things into account, right?
That's exactly right.
Right. And in a true residency model, it is a partnership between, a school district and an educator preparation program. And so, I mean, that really is how it's supposed to work, in that there's, both that sort of clinical experience happening in schools, but that there's also that combination, that integration of, theory and research with the practical part of it. And so, I'm not sure about requiring someone to enroll in a program. I still think about these. I mean, I know they're outliers, right? But somebody who has a PhD in, biology and has taught at the, college level, but doesn't have a teaching certificate, do we want that person to enroll in a BA, or a master's program in education? If they can demonstrate those skills, I think, again, particularly, I really appreciated Jill's point about the fact that we have those, professional development dollars available. I think it could be highly encouraged or something, or maybe there's some incentive to do that, but that it's not a requirement that becomes another hurdle for people to jump through if for some reason it doesn't work for them. I'm also just not sure in North Carolina, sort of access to EPPs in every part of the state, and sort of how easy that is. I know, with online learning, certainly there's more opportunities, but again, just don't want to hamstring people who might have the real potential to not have some alternative way to, show that they are still able to get what they need, even if it may not be through an EPP, being specifically enrolled in the EPP.
And just to chime in on Melissa's point, I want to say again two things. One is that's a great point, and I think to that point, first of all, I don't think that we want to make the mistake of thinking all these people who are the exception are really the rule. The vast majority of our folks are are served by the current EPP. I mean, Michael's point, we have a lot of EPPs in a lot of places, and most folks don't have that background, and so those EPPs provide that foundation, or however you want to phrase that. But I think Melissa's making a really good point around, we do have some weird situations that come through every now and then. Again, they are the exception, not the rule. But what would be nice, and I don't know that it's this committee, but just thinking broader strokes, and for some of the folks who are involved across committees, what would be really helpful from our end is when we get somebody who obviously checks a different kind of box. And I'm going to follow up with Melissa's example with the whole, somebody who has a doctorate. And actually, we had one of those. Okay. A person who had a doctorate in biochemistry or something and wanted to be a teacher. And when we reached out about that individual, about, what hoops they had to jump, there's very little flexibility, or there's nobody at DPI, or there doesn't seem to be a mechanism to say, can this person, can we agree that this person is qualified, and maybe that's what we're trying to come up with is, how are they showing that? But I do think that there is a place for some reasoned judgment and expertise in making some, what I would consider to be just obvious decisions about whether or not somebody should be allowed to get a license or not, based on certain credentials they may have. I'll tell you another one we've got, and this is completely weird, somebody who wants to study Cherokee. Now, there's one district in our state, I think, where Cherokee is offered as a regular part of their language curriculum, and they want to hire a teacher, and this person can't get a teaching license, or couldn't for a while, and there was no mechanism around those kinds of exceptions. That kind of work, and again, I know I don't mean this to get out of our lane, but I think Melissa brings up a really good point around, there are some folks for what, no matter what we do, they still aren't going to fit it. We can't cover, we're never going to come up with something that covers every single contingency unless we just erase everything and say, okay, go at it. It'd be great to have some sort of a mechanism to, have a committee decide, or some sort of flexibility with DPI, or, if we agree, can we move forward? I just want to throw that out.
It's also part of how the EPP is designed, right? So before I left state, we had an example there too, where we had a person with a PhD in history, teaching high school history. He enrolled in Pathway to Practice. We have 5 fully online preparation programs in our state that are alternative programs. Some are university affiliated, some are not. 4 are not university affiliated. 1, Pathway to Practice, is affiliated. This person came into Pathway to Practice and finished in 4 months. 4 months, and he was licensed. And he passed the EdTPA, right? He passed his content exam. So the thing is, the programs exist. The fact that people aren't finding the programs is the problem, I think. It's not that the programs don't exist. I'm beating this dead horse now about affiliations.
So I think it's important for us to get that information out to districts and to people who are not finding them, because as a CTE teacher, and I'm not sure if I'm the only one in here, I'm going to advocate for those folks who are coming in from industry may just want to be a CTE teacher, forever. They may be a paramedic coming in and teach that high school EMT program, or somebody with an associate's in criminal justice coming in and teach law and justice. But I think it's important that folks like me and every other CTE teacher have that information, right, at their fingertips. And I don't know how we do that. I think that maybe we hold districts accountable. I'm not exactly sure, but somebody needs to have that information sent to those folks as well. So they're involved, right? Because I know some of those programs may or may not be set up for some of those particular teachers. And I just wanted to throw that out there and speak for some CTE teachers as well.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. The other thing with CTE in particular, we have the pathway for people to do work through the department. So if you were like TNI or CTE, right, you can be an alternative alternatively licensed and then do, I think, isn't it like 17-week program or something through DPI, through CTE?
Well, and Michael, to circle back on both the examples that you and Laura cited, I would say that this framework that we're trying to develop actually would address both of those issues. Your PhD person who comes in needing to enroll in a program, they could take the EdTPA and take the praxis and then go ahead and be a license 3. And then once, without having to enroll in any program, right? Because you said they were fine.
Yep.
But, you know, the teacher that's trying to teach Cherokee, I think, could be the same way. Obviously, we're not going to have many assessments of Cherokee content knowledge, so we'd have to figure that out. But if they're an effective teacher and can demonstrate effectiveness, then, you know, we've addressed them through this framework. It's trying to make that funnel at the beginning as wide as possible so that all those little exceptions and issues that we run into with licensure can be addressed by people being able to demonstrate, you know, their abilities along the way and then their effectiveness to become fully licensed.
We are running short on time. So how do we want to wrap this up?
Like you said, it's messy.
Okay, so I think I heard we want just a little more time to think about whether or not the rubric is the right approach. The rubric may in fact contain the standards that we would expect to move through the 1 and 2, 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Michael, that's what I heard as well.
Okay, and we're still struggling with if so Maureen, then we can also have more conversation with other folks, the other co-chairs, about the affiliated question that our group is still, I think, you know, perhaps it's mixed on whether or not you need to be affiliated. And then
Yeah,
a question for the licensure group is whether or not the current licensure standards or requirements need to be pushed to level 4. And did I miss anything?
I don't know if we have the actual definition of effective yet from any of the other groups, or if any other groups have thought about that, but if we could also see if anybody has any feedback on that, I think that'd be very helpful to know what we're trying to measure.
Yeah. But it does feel like ultimately, if we have a rubric that we can assess candidates by, no matter how they meet the standard inside of that rubric, how they meet the standard inside the rubric doesn't really matter, as long as they meet the standard inside the rubric. So it could be an observation, could be an artifact, could be a micro-credential, but that seems to be the path maybe that we want to go down.
Michael, if all of this could be like what you just said, summarized and sent back out, and then let us look at it and think about it, I think that would be great.
Okay, Kim, can we do that for the next, between now and the next meeting?
Yes, that sounds good.
And I think too, for our next meeting, if everyone could take some time to look through that rubric and identify things that you think are already really well written and very in line with the work we're trying to do. If you identify things that maybe need some additional work, some ideas that you have on what would need to be added or removed, or if there's anything that's currently not in that rubric that you think would be very important for us to include in our work, if you could just make a note of something that you think should be added.
And I'm not sure if I misheard, but did we say that we were going to push the standards that are currently in place to level 4? Is that what we said? Or was it a specific level? I don't even know what to call it. A specific level of a standard, like, for example, accomplished.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that we made any decision about that.
Okay, I heard you say something about pushing the standards to level 4.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think that
Licensure.
when Laura and I were talking about so Laura and I were both around when this rubric was developed, and also when the NESIS were developed, and when this work was ongoing, what essentially happened was the NESIS rubric was created, but if you read it, a teacher candidate doesn't actually have the opportunity to meet all of the different elements inside the NESIS rubric because they are not the teacher of record. It's not their classroom. So this rubric, the candidate rubric, was developed because of that. And then, but the alignment isn't one-to-one. It's actually on an angle. So I think our conversation was about proficiency, developing, and accomplished aren't parallel. Is that right? But rather they're on this angle. So sorry for that confusion.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else for the good of the group? All right, then we will we'll get together and get this information out, and we'll send it out for another conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Can we get a motion
Thank
for
you.
adjournment?
Oh, can we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Seconded. This is Jeff.
Second. All in favor?
Bye.
Bye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Kim, real quick before you jump off, does it save the chat as well, or should I make a copy of that really fast?
It doesn't save the chat. It just does the transcription.
Okay, I'm going to try to copy it really quick then, because there were some really good questions and points and links in there. So I just want to try to grab them.
Sure.
Okay. I was thinking that it did not copy.